Thanks for joining us this afternoon for our panel titled May the Force Be With You, Countering Unauthorized UAVs, Drones with 5G, 6G Technologies. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator, Colonel Mike Black, United States Air Force, Vice President for, can they empty the trash later? President for Defense, FCA International. Mike joined FC in July of 2022. He is a senior cyber information technology leader with over 40 years of experience in communications, cyber operations, project and program management, organizational development, and leadership discipline. Prior to joining FC, Mike spent 10 years in the private sector and 26 years in the United States Air Force, holding various communications and leadership positions, most notably as commander of the White House Communications Agency. Mike is a member of the White House Communications Agency Hall of Fame, which we just celebrated. We're very proud of him. He's an inductee into the Air Force C4 Association Hall of Fame, class of 2025. Sir, over to you.
All right, thank you, boss. This is the second time that I've had the honor of having my boss or my president and CEO introduce me, so it feels good. Thank you, boss. We have a panel here. It's a consortium of folks. You may have heard Susan talk about this earlier. Those that have been at some of our AFCEA meetings recently, we talked about this new initiative that we're doing. We're bringing a group of companies together along with government to work a specific issue. And in this instance, we're going to be talking about counter UAVs and integrated sensing and communications. And so I'm honored to do this. What I'm first going to do is just go down the line and ask each panelist to introduce themselves and their experience associated with the topic, and then we'll come back and start with the questions. So Christopher, just first you. Tell us who you are. And
Sure. My name is Christopher Ling. I lead Ericsson's Federal. It's a newly established subsidiary. It's 18 months old. This is in recognition that Ericsson, and I'm sure much as the other leading telco providers in the world know today, is that this is an existential threat we're facing with the Chinese, and the need to really sort of advance technology and take more ownership of the digital infrastructure. Today, Huawei owns 57% of it. By 2030, that number could be 70%. There needs to be a concerted effort and a better synchronization between private industry and government to rapidly change this. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to you about probably one of the first use cases, which is this integrated sensing and communication.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike McConnell. I have the distinction of being the oldest member at this conference. I have flunked retirement 5 times. I had worked previously with Christopher. He said, we have a chance to beat Huawei if you'll come out of retirement. So I came out of retirement, and we're on our way, and that's our objective, and we'll talk about it today. Thanks so much.
Hello, everybody. I am Tom Rondo. I serve as the Principal Director of Future Generation Wireless Technologies for the Pentagon. So I basically run all the 5G, 6G research projects and try to drive policy for the Department of Defense, Department of War, in anything related to future generation wireless. A big part of that is securing our infrastructure, securing our nation, securing the information flows around and in the battlefields, making sure that we get the best technology to our warfighters that they deserve, they demand, make sure that we're better for it. So building private 5G architectures that can be tactically deployed when we go out there ourselves, working with commercial infrastructure that is key to our mission success, and ensuring that we have higher security, higher fidelity using that infrastructure when we can access it. So we have a pretty broad, wide scope of things to do that, and we'll get into a lot of that, but I will say, to finish up here, one of my key initiatives going into next year where we will be getting a lot of funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed last year, going towards integrated sensing and communications and how to make sure it is operationally relevant for national security, our warfighting, and our peacekeeping efforts.
Hello everyone, I'm Younghan Nam from Samsung Research America. Today I'm representing Samsung Networks, which is building commercial base stations. So I think this 6G is giving us tremendous opportunity to contribute to national security as well, based upon this ISAC technology that's integrated sensing and communication. Traditionally, these cellular base stations were used for offering high data rate to public, but the same infrastructure can be used for national security with utilizing those commercial cellular waveforms. We can detect drones. So that's the main use case we are envisioning. And this cellular communication and this sensing, they can be trade-off with like considering some threat level or commercial demand. So these are the main technologies we are currently building. And I think there will be good opportunity coming here. And I'm looking forward to having good discussion with all of the panel. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, I hope. My name is Steve Vogelsang. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Nokia Federal Solutions. Nokia Federal Solutions is a wholly owned subsidiary of Nokia focused on U.S. government, in particular Department of War. As you may know, Nokia has a broad portfolio of communications systems, whether it's over fiber optic cables, routing systems, data center switching systems, and of course 5G and upcoming 6G systems that Nokia builds. My role in Nokia Federal is to bring that technology and product portfolio to the fight and to the missions for the U.S. government. And this area we'll talk about today, counter UAS, as was just mentioned by my colleague here, there's a lot of electromagnetic waves that are bouncing around you right now. And we're trying to figure out how can we use those to not only communicate, but to identify objects. And these are objects that aren't radiating, these are just physical objects. So we'll talk much more about that today. It's an exciting new area. We think it can bring a lot to the fight.
All right, so thank you. Now that you've met the esteemed panelists, we're going to get started. Now, ISAC, or Integrated Sensing and Communication, it's going to transform the 5G and 6G networks from being a passive type network to really an active intelligence platform. And so I'm going to start off with you, Christopher. May the force be with you. I mean, that's a slogan or a cliche or a saying, but what does it mean in the context of future digital infrastructure, data, spectrum, sensing, or even all of the above?
Yeah, so I think that we obviously coined the phrase "the force be with you" because it's something that everybody recognizes, and it's really utilizing the infrastructure as it is as a force multiplier. So I think we've all seen what's going on in Ukraine, and then the drastic change in the warfare using drones, not only in how effective they are, but how low cost they are. And that is really being driven by the commercial industry. And so what you know, we're in a situation right now to engage drones. You can't shoot $1 million missile at something that costs $500. And so the question is how can you use this force, the existing infrastructure, to give you parity in the economic equation associated with that? And that's what's so exciting about this integrated sensing and communication. It uses the existing 5G infrastructure, and you can detect and track drones as it flies through there. That's a significant game changer because we often think about the cost of engaging a target. There's a huge cost associated with tracking it and using the radar as well. And so this is the first step, I think, in sort of creating the equality in terms of this bending the cost curve and engaging the commercial advantages that the adversary has shown on the battlefield.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay, Admiral, how does ISAC-enabled sensing complement or challenge, traditional systems like EW, radar, optical sensors aboard ships, or even shore installations.
How does it challenge them or
Yeah,
complement them?
Either one.
Well,
Your opinion.
Well, in my view, they're complementary. Just for the record, I mentioned I'm the oldest person at the conference, and the other thing about me is I hate acronyms. I hate acronyms. When in a previous life, when I was senior enough, somebody used an acronym. I didn't know what it was. I'd charge them $1, and it would go in the Welfare and Rec Fund, and we had some great parties. ISAC, Integrated Sensing and Analysis Capability. What does it do? It commands and controls ours and tracks and shoots down theirs. So in my view, this is essential because theirs costs $600 and we need to track it and we need to shoot it down. So we need all the systems that we do have plus this new capability, just taking advantage of 5G. And there's another little challenge. We've got to make sure we have a total 5G core network. The adversary does, we do not. So there's a lot of challenges here, but it's pretty simple. They're going to use a cheap thing to try to take out our expensive things. So we got to track them and shoot them down with the cheap thing before they take out our expensive things. That's basically what this is doing, and it's complementary.
Okay. Dr. Rondo?
Yeah, I will say, though, there are some challenges, technical challenges with thinking about ISAC as integrated sensing and communications. Now you're trying to do multiple functions with the same system, so you're going to have to make some compromises at some point. And is that going to be reduction in capacity of your network, or is it going to be just reduction in fidelity of the sensing modality, right? We built, coming from the Department of War, we built some of the most exquisite radar and sensing devices that we deploy into the field to solve very specific problems with very high fidelity and reliability. And can we make sure that the networks that we deploy with ISAC integrated into it can match that function or offset that function enough? So we look at, what I'm looking at is a complete change in our thinking about how the sensing integrated in a densified urban and wide-scale deployed networks changes that construct, where instead of having one big exquisite system, we now have many, maybe subpar or not, maybe less than exquisite, but together create and fill gaps that we may no longer have. So if I have to look out really, really far, I'm going to put a lot of power out there, or I can rely on the fact that my network extends out there, and I can keep custody of that information across an entire large-scale network. So there's opportunities and challenges. We've just got to be honest about those. I would also say, from the commercial perspective, this is something that we studied in my ISAC Strategy Summit that we held last year to kind of kick off Future G's work in this area, where we started to think about, well, if you're going to use commercial networks as a sensing modality for national security, who takes on the risk of you being wrong? So do we actually have to offset that risk or offset the deployments and try to balance, again, liability and responsibilities from commercial networks who may not want to take that on? So again, just some really interesting challenges that we got to think about commercially and technologically.
So what I hear here is that it definitely does complement, but we need to be aware of the challenges. And if we acknowledge those challenges and are aware of that, then we can mitigate things and put it to use like we want to.
Yeah, always best to go in eyes wide open, understand the challenges so that you can take care of them before they become a problem.
Okay. In the interest of not contributing to the welfare bucket that the Admiral mentioned, I'm going to say for the next question for Young Ham, how do you view integrated sensing and communication, also known as ISAC, but I did spell it out, sir. How do you view that in terms of operational integration, experimentation today versus fielding at scale?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So traditional cellular networks are very good at scaling. So in United States, we have hundreds of thousands of base stations currently working, and those base stations are giving you seamless coverage of cellular communications already. So extending that technology for this sensing purpose, so this is going to be definitely feasible, and these base station companies like us are experts for that kind of challenges. So initially, the main testing will be done with like 1 or 2 base stations, but we know how to scale those solutions to 100,000 number of base stations.
Right, thank you. Does anybody have anything to add on that?
I would just argue that we need to accelerate getting to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of base stations faster than just single or double. You know, a lab experiment with one radio and one UE. Okay, great. You've proved out an algorithm. You take that to the real world, the clutter, the things you can't control. We need to get there faster. We need to have more of an agile mindset of getting this technology to the field faster. We have to be safe about it, of course. We got to figure that balance out. But I just want to argue for everybody that think about this from a deployment sense, continuous integration, continuous development kind of model, so we can understand the effects of the real world instead of just thinking that we solved a problem in an anechoic chamber that means nothing to a real deployment.
Yeah, actually, one thing I forgot to mention. So recently, in the industry, we are utilizing Open WAN, which utilizes softwareized radio access network, which can scale even better than before. So we don't use like specialized hardware. We use commercial off-the-shelf servers, and our networks are working like cloud companies. So that way, actually, the scaling becomes easier and easier. So now those cellular servers are also equipped with GPUs, like NVIDIA GPUs, and those can offer superior detection capabilities for this ISAC purpose.
All right. Steve, what distinguishes integrated sensing and communication from simply adding sensors to the network, and why does this distinction matter for resilience and scalability?
Yeah, sure. So a big goal of integrated communication and sensing is dual use of technology, right? So we all know that we like to communicate wirelessly, so those signals are already there. Often they're called signals of opportunity. So those signals are out there. And I think what we're trying to do is figure out how can we utilize those to create a sensing. And as Dr. Rondeau pointed out, it's really a big distributed sensing array, because the resolution of any given one of those is probably not, well, I know it's not going to match the exquisite radars that have been developed. So I think that's the ultimate goal, is to reuse what's already being deployed. Now, having said that, we already know that, you know, a standard 5G signal today, those waveforms are not as good as they could be for detecting objects. So there's work being done in the standards organizations to look at, hey, can we inject within a 5G or 6G scheduler certain resource blocks, is what they're referred to, but basically change those waveforms into more of sounding type waveforms that are much, much better at detecting objects. So I think we can start with something today, and I think we can do demonstrations today. As Dr. Rondeau said, they're kind of limited. It's, you know, single radio saying, hey, look, there's a drone. The end goal, we don't want that. We want to be able to track that device, identify it, determine if it's a threat. And so we need to refine this over time, get better at creating the right type of waveforms, and that's all coming in the standards and in future implementations.
I think I'd just add to that one thing that's also unique about this is that it's a dual use technology. So there'll be commercial applications for this, and I think the big part of this is as DOW pivots more to a commercial first and leveraging commercial technology. This is an area in the future where drones are delivering FedEx packages and Amazon and so on and so forth. There needs to be some air traffic control function for that. This is also a technology that will be used for that. And so as that continues to evolve and it innovates, and as Steve has mentioned, you know, it scales up, there'll be lessons learned out of that will be immediately, I think, transportable into the national security space to make it more efficient and more cost effective for the government.
I think hitting on the dual use technology is something that's very important. I mean, it's just, in simple terms, we're talking about efficiencies and that. I'm going to go back to Christopher, but I think everybody will have some kind of input on this. We're going to talk about supply chain risk. How do we address supply chain risk and assurance in the future, where commercial cellular architecture or infrastructure becomes part of the kill chain, or at least the sensing chain.
Yeah, I mean, I know that seems like a new idea. In some ways, people don't realize that much of the highly encrypted classified information that the government shares today goes over the public infrastructure, right? So to some degree, there's already a precedent set for that. And so in the same way that happens, I think there'll be more and more reliance on commercial infrastructure as it exists today for that. As far as supply chain is concerned, that's a big challenge. I think that's not a challenge just faced by the companies that are sitting here at this table right now, but I think across the board we're realizing we're moving to a bipolar world, and that's a necessity. One of the things that at least our company has done is made a significant investment in building a 5G innovation factory, where all the products that are used here domestically are actually produced here domestically. I think one interesting option would be in the future that as this becomes more important for creating a sort of a trusted global network, and that's what is so important, I think, about our consortium, is that would give global reach, is the idea that those capabilities would be manufactured here in the U.S. and exported.
Anybody else on supply chain risk? Okay. I'm sorry? No? Okay. As a reminder, there's a microphone right out here in front. Just step up if you have a question. If you look me in the eye, I'm going to call on you. So have a question prepared. I've got a couple more in my kit here. But if you've got questions about this important topic, please just step up to the microphone and I'll make sure that I call on you. Admiral, what does right speed innovation look like? And how can government, industry, and academia and allies, we've talked a lot about allies and partners in this conference. It's been mentioned more than one time. So how can government, industry, and allies move fast without compromising this security or interoperability?
Well, I went to media training school, and what they taught you at media training school is no matter what the question is, you give them the answer you want to give you. So I'm not really sure I even understood your question, so I'm going to give you the answer I want to give you anyway. Most of you don't realize it, but the wealth that you enjoy is recorded as a data point in a computer. If you look at total wealth, about 95, 96% of it is in a computer as a data entry. And if you don't add up all the bills and the other things, it's less than 5%. The question that we're getting at here is trusted infrastructure. Now, your money, your wealth moves around the globe at network speed. $10 billion is a 20 millisecond transaction. Most people don't think about it, but through the U.S. banking system, we move somewhere on the order of $20 trillion a day. Now, our whole economy is only about 30 trillion a day. So if you start to think about global commerce, trusted infrastructure, moving the finances that pay for all this, a trusted infrastructure is essential. So it comes down to the question, do you want to let the United States and our allies build that infrastructure, or do you want to let China build that infrastructure? You may have missed it, but Christopher mentioned when we started, Huawei and ZTE now own 57% of the global infrastructure, and in 4 or 5 years, they're going to have over 70%. And I learned as a young naval officer that who controls the network wins. I lived that over and over again in the Cold War. So we've got to bring the commercial sector in to help satisfy the Department of War's needs and build this global infrastructure for the United States and its allies. Otherwise, it's going to be taken away from us. So I'm not sure I even got close to answering your question, but that's what I wanted to say to this audience.
Well, sir, I learned a long time ago that I will never tell an admiral that he is wrong or anything like that. So you answered it perfectly correctly. Dr. Rondeau, I look like you had something to say.
To take the Admiral's metaphor one step further, right? The currency in the battlefield at this point is information. And it's data being delivered truthfully and timely to decision makers, to command decision makers to make the right decision. And the speed of what's happening out there, and we're watching in Ukraine in real time right now, is constantly under attack and under threat. And it is constantly being bulked up and rebuilt by industry out in Ukraine. You talk to the telcos out there; they are working on the front line of battle constantly to rebuild and prop up their infrastructure. And most of the time, what we're seeing is they're not the conflict isn't tearing down those towers on purpose. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But it's often a matter of power and delivery of generators, fuel, batteries to keep those systems running. So almost it's a casualty of what's happening out there. But it's now a decision to whether or not you want to take down a base station, part of the cellular network, because you realize, oh, I kind of like using these too. It's part of our operations, our warfare. It's like, and we see some Marines here. I'll use my Lieutenant Colonel Ben Pimentel used to work for me. His metaphor that he brought to us is, if we have a tank and you just drive that tank across a river, if there's a bridge that can support a tank, use the bridge. If not, we'll build our own bridge. But similarly, from the oppositional side is, do I care enough that my adversary is using that bridge? And if so, more so than I want to use it, if so, maybe I'll take that bridge down. So that's the field tactics that are happening in kinetic battle today, is making those decisions and understanding the consequences of those decisions. So when we're talking about in building this up here, we're talking a lot about Isaac and national infrastructure and national security. We also have to think about it from that future of battle and the adaptation and intellectual weights that this takes for these battles to commence and for people to make the right decisions in light of this very complicated technological construction that, in one sense, as we were joking earlier today, we're infrastructure, like we're just infrastructure, but it turns out we're really important, really complicated infrastructure that's hard to use, hard to deploy, hard to understand how it operates in real time. So getting us familiarized, training people with understanding of how this technology works, making the technology more available and easier to understand. Those are all part of what's going to require us to make the right calls, to create the right technology, get into the hands of our warfighters, have them take it to the field, and make the right decisions based on timely, trustworthy, and relevant information delivered in real time. So those are all part of where I think the right sizing of technology needs to be thinking about.
Okay, I'd like to see if any of my industry esteemed panelists would want to chime in on that, because what I asked was, how can government, industry, and allies move fast without compromising security or interoperability? Is there an industry take on that, where industry falls in that?
Maybe a comment there. So it's a really, really difficult question to answer, right? How do we go fast on a technology like this? Department of War and the government are mission-oriented, national security-oriented, and that's what matters. Industry is driven by profits, right? Profits are what matters. So when you say, hey, industry, we need you to make an investment for national security purposes, industry is always going to look for a way to monetize. How can we make money? Is there another use case? Is there's a commercial application? You kind of flip it on its head. Normally we're saying, hey, we've got this great commercial technology. How can we adapt that to Department of War needs? I think in this case, it's, hey, we think we can build a technology that's very applicable for Department of War, but we're not sure of the commercial use case. And so I think the way that you go fast is you need to kind of seed the system, and we need to get through some of the initial, honestly, more research-oriented problems that we need to solve. When you talk about Isaac, there's not one size fits all. There's different companies have different ways of attempting to solve this problem. I don't think we know which one's the right answer. The reality is it's probably some combination. And as Dr. Rondeau mentioned earlier, the scaling problem is fundamental. it's not going to work if I enable it on one base station or if I enable it on one sensor that's sitting out there. This has to really be a very scalable solution because we know we're not transmitting at a gigawatt, so our range is going to be limited. And so I think that's the role. The future G office, I think, is stepping up to take that role to find a way to get us over the hump, get that initial research going, solve the hard problems, figure out how we scale it, make it into a workable solution, and then we can take that as industry and we'll go find commercial use cases to really help scale it and drive down the cost so we can deliver it back to the DOW.
Yeah, see, that's a great point. It's kind of this public-private partnership that we're talking about, this consortium that Christopher is pulling together and talking about here. It's going to be critical because I talk about scale, but scale comes with cost. And while we have money to spend towards getting towards scale, there's no way that the government can offset the entire cost of the infrastructure across the entire United States. So we need to be working in tandem with the private sector so that they can see commercial wins coming out of this. Well, we offset that risk, and where we buy down the risk by offsetting the cost of infrastructure in some locality, but hopefully big enough that it matters so we can actually see the scale at work, but not the entire country. But then enough where there's that. We've primed the pump. We've given some access. We've shown the value from a national security perspective. We become a customer of that as we start to scale it out there. They can then build out and help scale to the true, continental scale that we're talking about, and then be priming for the next iteration of ISAC applications that maybe don't necessarily have a national security bent towards them, but are now benefiting from that same infrastructure. So we're talking about a very close partnership of how to use our money effectively to offset each other's interests and to create the basis of that future where we've created the technologies, the capabilities, the infrastructure, and now the marketplaces that are driving those economies that bring that economy of telecommunications back into the West, into the United States, and with our partners and allies, and offset the dominance that China keeps going towards with Huawei and ZTE today.
I think another very important aspect of that is really the resiliency of the network, right? So I think, Tom, what you're talking about is ISAC will run on a network. We have many other things, the speed on the battlefield. I think the line blurs between commercial networks and military networks. I mentioned before, a lot of the classified information flows out on the public infrastructure right now. So network resilience is important. Why is that? Network resilience really becomes deterrence. I don't imagine in the future, to whatever dust up may occur, it will not happen kinetically first. It'll be a non-kinetic engagement first. And he who has the most resilient network at the end of the day will have the best position of deterrence. And so this collaboration and this consortium is, yes, it's about looking at these different use cases and how can we leverage this new technology in a meaningful way and fulfill national security requirements. It's also about understanding the real resilience of the network and building deterrence, and that investment creates that level of deterrence that you have to measure against the adversary.
All right, let's talk a little bit about technology and spectrum. Spectrum is both an opportunity and a constraint. Finite amount of spectrum out there. And how do we balance that sensing and communication, and again, interoperability, particularly in a crowded RF spectrum? Anybody?
Yeah, I'm gonna come at this from the Department of War's perspective, not supporting, generally speaking, what the Department of War usually thinks about these questions. Usually it's you're taking our spectrum over our dead body. This is a huge opportunity for us to actually offload tasks, offload responsibilities where we may be using the spectrum only a small part of the time. When we need it, but it's only a small part of the time. Meanwhile, commercial industry is trying to grow into these new application areas. Spectrum is currency out there for them in many ways, for many different reasons, but contiguous spectrum. And one of the fun things that I, looking at from this ISAC, technology area is some of the first people thinking about ISAC looked where, hey, we can receive these bounces, we can turn it into knowledge about the physical world. Isn't that incredible? Let me just feed it into an AI algorithm and it will tell me. And I asked this one company, I said, well, what frequency band are you using? And they said, oh, it doesn't matter. We just throw it into the algorithm and it figures it out. And I sat back and I thought, honestly, maybe you're right. at this point. But then when you start to mix true radar theory with the AI models that we can put towards this, when you start to unlock the power there, you know that's where the growth is going to come from. Industry knows this now. The radar range equation, bandwidth matters. So discrimination of objects by having excess or larger contiguous swaths of bandwidth, that is a part of the standard radar equation. I want them to have more access to that spectrum so they can use it more effectively than we are necessarily, because they're also they're driving the economy, they're driving applications, they're inventing new marketplaces for us to benefit from, and then I can buy that sensing data back from them. So I can access that without necessarily having to maintain and build and deploy all of my exquisite hardware until I absolutely need them. And that's going to be the trick, is how do we actually balance those needs off, and how do we communicate those needs where we say, you know what, we're going to use this ISAC, and let's just say, for instance, that I can take ISAC and make it, and I could take over all of the ASR9s, all of the air traffic control radars in the United States. I could replace them with an ISAC modality of mixing terrestrial and non-terrestrial networking signals together. Say I can do that, but maybe, again, it's not as high fidelity as some of our systems out there today, and I look at that and something rings and says, I'm actually not sure what that is. I think it's a plane, but it could be a ballistic missile. That's when you turn on the exquisite systems that can actually do the distinction, the differentiation that we require. Can we balance those needs together and share the spectrum in a more effective way, because they're inventing faster than we typically do, and the cost curves come down when they invest in it and provide other material benefits from it for the rest of the economy. That's a very different perspective than you normally hear from somebody from the Department of War, but I think there's some significant value in thinking that way.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Yeah, I think maybe building on that, there's another initiative in the Department of War looking at advanced spectrum coexistence, right? So
Oh yeah, I run that too.
Exactly what Dr. Rondeau just described is sort of, I think of it as a sensor fusion or a layered approach, right? So, but we've got to figure out not only how do we have these different layers, but how do these layers give way to each other? How do we coordinate? So I have maybe an ISAC type solution that's operating in the communications network with coarse granularity. Maybe it can't identify everything. In order to trigger what Dr. Rondeau described, we have to have a way to cooperate in that spectrum to coexist. So how do we back off one system and open up that spectrum for another system that perhaps is a higher fidelity type of system? That's exactly the work that's going on right now in the Advanced Spectrum Coexistence demonstration. Again, that's funded by the Department of War as well.
And fast. We have to do it fast, right? We can't take minutes. We probably can't even take seconds to come to decisions. That coexistence and the cooperation have to happen sub-second.
Yeah, as a communication guy, I heard a lot from operators that they don't have enough bandwidth to scale in 6G, especially around 7 gigahertz. So differently from other countries, in United States, the bandwidth opportunity over there is quite limited. But I think even for this ISAC perspective, I mean, as the previous panelists already mentioned, this contiguous bandwidth is very important. And this around 7 gigahertz, if we can find a way to have this contiguous 400 megahertz, for example, that's going to be really useful for ISAC as well as traditional 6G communication point of view. So I hope we can find such a solution together.
Admiral, I thought you were gonna say something earlier. Did you want to?
No, I just thought I'd tell another one of my sea stories. As a young one-star selectee, I found myself sitting in the Joint Staff about 5 days before the Iraqis invaded Kuwait. The guy that I relieved was gone. We didn't have cell phones, so they couldn't get him back. So General Powell said, well, I guess I'm stuck with you. And so off and running. So I'm a Navy guy. We're going to a ground war. And I'm sort of learning at the trough there. The thing that I wanted to share with this group that surprised me is we went through a planning process, but then the question was, we got to get the beans and the bullets and the troops delivered. And General Powell said, that's not a problem. And so I'm, in the room listening, and well, how are we going to do that? We're just going to have commercial airplanes do it. I did not know this, but there's an existing agreement between the commercial airlines and the U.S. government. U.S. government pays an annual subsidy of some kind, and when they need the planes, they get them. So I'm delighted to hear Dr. Rondeau speak about spectrum the way he just spoke about it, because always DOD is, don't touch my spectrum. So there's a way, I'm sure, to work out. Now, you said it had to be seconds or milliseconds. I'm good with that, but I bet it's doable, because it's worked in the past when we had problems that appeared to be unsolvable. So I just think we need to think that through and go try to do it.
In the spirit of acronyms, sir, I believe that was called CRAFT, Civil Reserve Air Fleet something.
And you notice I did not use it, and you did, so that's going to cost you $1.
Okay, keeping on technology, you might have touched on this a little bit, but how does 5G, advanced and future 6G architectures technically enable sensing without degrading core communications performance? Now, we talked about spectrum a little bit, and maybe we touched on it a little bit, but there's anybody that wants to add on that? How do we, again, how do 5G, advanced and future G architectures technically enable sensing without degrading core communications capabilities?
So if we just say enabling, it may not be so difficult because we already have existing reference signals offered by 5G and 6G. Those are used for channel estimate, channel state information measurement. We call CSIRS, channel state information reference signal. So those are anyway offered. So utilizing that, we can do some limited sensing at the at the mobile cell phone side. And for uplink point of view, we have SRS and DMRS. Those can be used for sensing purpose. So just for enabling, it's not that difficult. But optimizing, that's a completely different thing, especially when there is a high traffic at the network. Then without compromising this communication performance, it's going to be difficult to optimize the sensing performance. So probably we need to think of some critical scenario. Then maybe we have to compromise our communication performance. But in like a normal situation, probably difficult to compromise. But not always, I mean, the communication network is not always like 80% occupied. So in traditional, I mean, in many cases, we are seeing like a 30%, 40% occupancy. So in that cases, probably we can make use of them. So in 6G, probably in standards, we need to make an effort to make our waveform for sensing more efficient, but powerful. So it's a kind of conflicting goal, but that is something the industry experts need to pursue.
Maybe just add a few comments. I mean, there is no free lunch. So if we're going to enable sensing, it depends on how you do it, of course. But I'll speak, there's various approaches. I'll speak a bit about what we call monostatic sensing, which is I have a base station site that is being repurposed as well as a sensor. And so if you're familiar with the way 5G works, most 5G is a time division duplex system. So those base stations are transmitting through the downlink, and then they stop and they start listening for the uplink. And so what you would need to do to enable sensing is while it's transmitting, it has to listen simultaneously to see the reflections. So there's a trade-off there. I've got a big panel, a bunch of antennas. We got to figure out, well, how many of those antennas are going to be listening while the others are transmitting? These are all trade-offs that are being worked through actively now. We have folks in labs doing research, trying to make those trade-offs. And as my colleague Jung mentioned earlier, we do want to take advantage of available transmission slots when the network's idle. Okay, well, we can use that to send specific waveforms that are being used for sensing. But these are all things we have to work through. Now, there's other approaches, which is passive sensing, that doesn't require that base station site to listen. It's just there's sensors out there that are listening to the existing communication signals, and through some AI magic are figuring out, physically what they're seeing. So that's another approach. I think there's a lot of work to be done to really understand what are the ultimate trade-offs. There probably will be some, but I think the goal will be let's minimize it so it doesn't really have a major impact on the system.
Okay. And we're still looking for that first question out there. I know when the first person stands up, we will follow suit. So if you do have questions, please step up to the microphone. You can't have a conference, an IT or cyber conference, without mentioning AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning. I'm going to finish this and then I'm going to come to you, Ross. Okay. But you can stand there. You can stand. I'll be quick. Real quick on how does software-defined networks, AI and machine learning, edge computing, enhance the integrated sensing and communications ability to detect, classify, track UAVs in real time? Anybody want to touch that one?
I mean, I think it's absolutely critical at this point. The challenge that you have with the current way we do communications infrastructure is the first thing that radio tries to do is cut out as much excess noise as it can. So it goes from a wobbly analog signal that has all the sorts of anomalies in it and tries to convert that down to bits as quickly as possible and then decode those bits. And it throws away all that other information. But it's all that other information that's what we want to sense or use for the sensing perspective. So you got to get that to enough compute power. So you need that edge compute integrated tightly with your networking infrastructure in order to have that to cut it down. But now that could be done with classic signal processing technology, but advanced enough signal processing is indistinguishable from AI, and so eventually you get to this point where you really do need to have those kind of AI models and methods to take out the complexities of the real world. That's really what it does for us, is we can predict and plan all we want, but everything that's happening in this room right now is really, truly unpredictable. So you're gonna need to be able to have those models that are gonna be able to take advantage of that. I don't think that those things are indistinguishable in the future from these networks. That's the basis of how we're gonna do this ISAC work.
All right, thank you. All right, Ross.
All right, I made eye contact with Michael, so I got to ask a question. Two-part question, probably for you, Dr. Rondo. Not really related, but I think you're the right guy to ask. So a lot of our friends on the Hill want to sell off some of the spectrum, and DOW is like, don't touch our spectrum, but we only have one vote in that. An alternative is dynamic spectrum sharing, and I'm sure you're aware of that technology, and it exists out there, and a lot of the carriers are pushing for it to do that, and it's great if we can make it work, right? If the military needs it, it prioritizes this part of the spectrum, and they use it how they need to. Is the department investing in the development and testing of that technology so we can actually, so we don't have to sell off the spectrum, but we can actually share it? And the second part of the question is, when we fight in an austere environment where there isn't this infrastructure, is there an alternative investment, other means where we might bring the infrastructure in those environments, or what other means would we use to do counter UAS mission, for instance?
Okay, so we did have a vote in the spectrum sale. I was a direct part of that conversation happening between the Pentagon and the White House. Myself and the DepSecDef were intimately involved, along, of course, with our colleagues in CIO. And we came to a deal. Like, we had to, and it was tough fought. And the main thing that we went in there with was we needed to block off that lower 3 gigahertz spectrum. And by the way, this was a lesson learned in how to approach the Chinese way of doing business, because the way that they worked around these spectrum policies and undercut us at every World Radio Conference for the past decade is tricked us into thinking that things didn't matter that matter to them. But then they carved out certain things like their use of the lower 3 gigahertz spectrum. And so they have 5 gigahertz bands deployed and using that lower 3 gigahertz. Well, the physics of radar tells us that the lower 3 gigahertz is really important, and they build their radars the same way. They use that spectrum because the physics is really good. So how is it that they're using their radars, but also deploying 5G in lower 3 gigahertz, and they're coexisting? That was the argument that was being used against us. So China was using their policy practices within the World Radio Conferences and the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, to drive a wedge between us and the Department of War and Department of Commerce. Well, luckily you can see right through that by making the simple argument, they're not actually using the lower 3 gigahertz for 5G, low power indoor use only. You can coexist with low power indoor use of the lower 3, and our radar systems don't see that. So, but that is a nuance to the conversation that rarely hits the folks on the Hill. They hear one thing and then they drive that forward. Walking in there was Steve Feinberg, our Deputy Secretary of War, who is a brilliant person and a friend of mine, and he gets to the heart of technical details, and we spend hours with him if we have to, driving that forward. So we managed to make that argument clear to the White House and to Congress. And we did have a couple of key senators supporting us in all of this on the Senate Armed Services Committee. The second one was the 7.4 gigahertz, the 8.4 gigahertz. I will not go deep into that discussion, but there are critical assets up there, and we finally figured out how to convince Secretary Lutnick that he had to back away from that. But the rest of that spectrum, we realized, look, it's going to be hard, but it's doable. We can offset, and as I mentioned, there are certain aspects of spectrum that's being reviewed right now by NTIA. They do have a spectrum analysis going on in at least 3 different bands to see which ones we can auction off under the terms of the One Big Beautiful Bill, Reconciliation Act of last year, to make sure that we understand the pain and the cost that it's going to do to recover from that pain. Part of that, I think, is actually, again, reusing commercial technology and commercial spectrum for military use when we need it, and finding ways to pair and share. So then to your next question about spectrum sharing, how do we kind of tie these things together? Well, there's going to be certain areas of the United States where we have few, if any, customers. White Sands Missile Range. Not a whole lot of consumers sitting on that range that AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile really care about. And in fact, we used to have to warn people doing summer jobs around there, if you see a do not cross this sign fence in White Sands Missile Range, the WSMR, do not cross that fence. There are things that fly around that range that you do not want to come anywhere close to. So we have certain areas where we know that there's not going to be a whole lot of consumers, but we have need for commercial communications infrastructure. So how do we work with commercial industry to build that infrastructure, then share it at the edge where it does meet consumer demands? That is a spectrum sharing model that is actually well understood. And that we can figure that spectrum sharing model out because you're sharing cellular communications with other cellular communications. Then we get to how do you share spectrum with military use of that spectrum? Our radar systems, our weapons platforms, our comms links. That's where it becomes really difficult. But Steve actually already mentioned this. You called it dynamic spectrum sharing. The original announcement came out as advanced dynamic spectrum sharing demonstration. We have renamed that within the department just to make sure that you're constantly confused. We now call it Advanced Spectrum Coexistence Demonstration. So ASCD, is the new term for ADSSD, if you saw that announcement come out of the National Spectrum Consortium last year. So we are actively working that and I know I'm taking a lot of time here, but try to cut it down to 3 quick things we're trying to understand within this ASCD construct. One is non-cooperative spectrum sensing. Can the networks observe enough of the spectrum to say, there's something happening in the military use of this spectrum, I need to shut myself down? So that's one model that we're studying. The second model is where there's some form of cooperative communication between the DOW and commercial industry that says, we're about to do something, we need this area to either lower its power or shift your users off to other spectrum. Which again is why getting more spectrum to industry does work, because the more you have, the more you can offload and shift it around when you need it. So does that work? And then the third one, the challenge, which kind of goes to your final question, which is how do we do this outside of the United States? And I don't know about you guys, but I would prefer to fight my wars outside of the United States territory. So this is hyperbole, a little bit of a joke, so don't take me too seriously. But am I really going to call up some country's dictator and say, hey, your 5G network is really affecting my ability to kill your people? Would you mind turning it down for a bit? probably not going to happen. So we do have to figure out true spectrum coexistence, and that's the third leg of this, which is the hardest one. Can we actually coexist simultaneously and basically ignore the fact that other signals are out there? Some interesting ideas there, but that's certainly the hardest, most technically advanced aspect of this. So those are some of the thoughts there to answer your question.
Well, Ross, thanks for that thought-provoking two-part question. I appreciate that. That was more than I asked for. I hit up Ross earlier for, hey, give me one question. But I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to get towards the end here. What I want to do at the very end is I want one sentence or phrase. What is the single most important action, policy, technical, or operational, that we must take in the next 24 months to ensure that integrated sensing and communication delivers the real warfighting advantage? One sentence. What's the single most important action, policy, technical, or operational, that we must take in the next 24 months to ensure that ISAC, I'll put the dollar in, sir, delivers a real-world warfighting advantage? Anybody? You're all going to have the opportunity.
I'll go for it. Why not? Close collaboration between industry and government.
Shaking your head. You have the same answer?
Yes, joint project across the government and industry, like operator, military contractor, and not the least, network vendors. We all work together for ISAC.
I'll say I want to see reshaping of the concept of operations, testing, and training as three separate concepts, and start thinking about combined operational test and training to get back to getting into the field, getting it scaled, getting users, getting experience with it, so we can move faster with true real-world development and execution of capabilities.
I have a short answer, but I'll provide a little background. I probably was the first director of the National Security Agency to really focus seriously on the make code, the protect side of our mission. Two missions: break code, read the other guy's stuff; make code, keep them reading our stuff. I did that in 1992 when the internet was just starting to explode. I gave lots of speeches. I went to see the SecDef. I went to see the president. I went to see the senators and congressmen. They looked at me like I had two heads. Over and over. We didn't even call it cybersecurity back in those days. We called it InfoSec, information security. So it was a long journey. So my answer to your question is, for this to work at the most senior level, they have to understand, if this concept of a consortium and cooperation does not work, the Chinese win. It's simple as that. Imagine a world where they can control over 70% of the global infrastructure and on a path to control even more. Whoever controls the network wins. You got to understand, if we don't do this, the Chinese win.
You know, it's been mentioned here before that I've been a big proponent of putting together this commercial consortium. And I think the big part of that is commercial companies need to take on the risk of integration for the government. The government's normal acquisition process is to get a large-scale system engineering and integration company to integrate these piece parts. Large commercial companies don't buy commercial tech that way. We need to do a better job as commercial technology companies, focusing on the government's need and collectively working together to take on the risk of integration.
All right. Well, we had an excellent panel here with government, industry, and academia. We've got the PhD here, dual-hatted academia and government, and I appreciate the emphasis on this consortium. I'm looking to take this to the next step. This is an important aspect that AFCEA is looking at, and Christopher, I appreciate you leading this effort and the energy that you're putting in this. And I want to thank the esteemed panelists. Now, I was keeping score on the who has the most money in the jar. No offense, Dr. Rondo, but you have the most money that has to go in the jar. And I'm just following the Admiral's instructions, so don't get me. All right, how about a round of applause for this esteemed panel? Thank you.